First Samuel chapter 17, verses 33 through 40. Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw and strike it down. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from his wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag, in his pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. May you be blessed and challenged by the reading this morning.
Sometimes you hear a song in church and you just well up with tears, and other times you're like, I can't tear up right now. I gotta just think about something else. So I'm gonna have to listen to that again so that I can really hear it. David and Goliath. It's a familiar story to many of us. And I would say if you spent any time in church in probably early 90s, 80s, 70s, actually spent time in Sunday school during those years, you may vividly recall the David and Goliath felt board story. Felt boards, anyone? Survivors of felt boards, yes, we made it. Now, I will say, if you are sitting there going, what in the world is a felt board? Feel free to ask me after church, or any of the folks who raise their hands will happily take you down that traumatic memory lane. But don't worry, knowledge of a felt board is not required for the sermon this morning. With the story of David and Goliath on the felt board, we basically had David down in one corner of the board and Goliath in the other corner of the board. And around the board, there were placed pictures of the onlookers, those who wanted to see what was going to happen in this battle. Now, the David and Goliath story is the underdog story, or it's a David and Goliath story, a term we use in our vernacular these days. Oh, it was a real David and Goliath, those Phillies and Mets. Pick a game, either way. Over the years, it can go one way or another. So during my formative years, and others apparently, we learned the story about an underdog, about a young man a little boy, a teenage boy, who said, I'm going to win this fight. And a young man who won the fight. And that's what we learned. The felt boards pictures stayed up in their spots, and you know what? As long as you stick to it and you've got God on your side, you can win the battle against the giant. But there's so much more to this story. David's father, Jesse, he sent David out to the battlefield because all of David's older brothers were out there fighting. And he said, here, take this food to them. They need strength for the battle. So David went out to the battlefield and gave his brothers their food. And while he was out there, David's life took a major turn. After distributing lunch, he heard a bellow come out from the battlefield. You know David, he's one of those kids that's still like, hey, how are you? Yes, I'm out here on the battlefield with my brothers. But that's not what he heard across the battlefield. David heard a challenge declared by Goliath, the giant. The giant said, come, take me on. Who's going to take me on? A little different from the, hey, here's your lunch, guys. But David heard that bellow. He heard that call to fight. And David stood up. Everyone else is just sort of sitting there probably trembling because they've been trembling for days and not taking on this giant. And David says, don't lose heart. Excuse me. Don't lose heart. I'll fight the Philistine. Can you imagine the scene there? Can you imagine everyone looking at little David, you know, his brother's little brother? But he said he knew he could take that challenge. So he jumped right into the fight. There was no contemplating whether he was going to fight or going to choose flight, or if he was even going to choose to fawn. He chose to fight. And now, back to my Sunday school days, at this point, the people who were in the background watching moved up for a better seat because they really wanted to see what was going to happen with this little boy who was going to fight the great giant. So we moved the pictures down a little bit more, closer to the fight. And for those of you who don't know, this was some 1970s high-tech felt board adhesive so that you could move the pictures down. And then next year, when your little sister came up to Sunday school, she could see the same felt board and have the pictures moved down. So this was high-tech stuff. Kids don't know what they're missing in Sunday school these days. So the fight was ready. We had our opponents, we had David, we had Goliath. And David, like I said, he was young. He was an adolescent, anywhere between 10 and 14 probably, a little kid heading out to battle against the adult male, the very large, even given a height in the Bible, 10-foot tall male. Now, David had doubters. There were definitely doubters in the crowd. But David knew he could get the job done. He explained that he was a successful shepherd who cared for his flock, and that whenever a lion or a bear, and I would like to add a tiger in there because you always have to have lions, tigers, and bears, would come at his sheep, he would rescue the sheep. He would go into the jaws of the sheep, or into the jaws of the lion, tiger, or bear, open them, take out his sheep, rescue his sheep, and make sure his sheep could go back with the flock and was safe. So David had fighting experience, and he was ready. And he's told people this, that he could handle the job. Now you have to remember King Saul was also on the felt board, crown, king, but this king never ran out and said, don't worry, I'll fight, I'll take care of it. And he was a king who fought many wars, wars and won many battles, to the point that he went through a period of never losing. I mean, he was top dog. He should have been out there. But no, little pup David, I'm going to fight this battle. So King Saul knew he had to do something. He had to protect David. So he went out to David and he said, David, here, put on this armor. Put on my armor. This is my armor. This is my breastplate, my shield, my mail, my helmet, my sword. This will save you. It saved me many, many times. You will win the war with this. So David takes the top-notch king's armor and puts it on. And literally and figuratively speaking, it did not fit him. It's hanging on him. You can picture the helmet sort of coming down over his eyes. That might have been best so he didn't have to see the 10-foot-tall Goliath, but armor just hanging, a sword so heavy he could barely lift it. And David stood there and he thought, this isn't me. I'm a shepherd. I'm not a warrior. I'm a shepherd and I have my shepherd's clothing and I have my shepherd's weaponry. And that's what I'm taking into battle. I'm taking myself. I'm taking my true and authentic self. So David, probably very nicely, said, thank you, King Saul. Here's your armor. I'm going to go back to my own clothes that I feel comfortable in, with my own weapon that I know how to use. David shows us how we are to be in battle, by being ourselves, by not taking on other clothing or traits or mannerisms or ways that are not true to who we are. And simply stated, like Pastor Linda says often, David was being the best version of himself that God called him to be, which is exactly what we are called to be. We are not called to take on someone else's role. We are not called to take on someone else's traits because it might look better on the outside or to other people. But we are called to be the best versions of ourselves as God has called us to be. So David, the shepherd, in his shepherd attire, with his shepherd weaponry, went out on the battlefield to fight Goliath. And we all know how it went. David won, Goliath 0. The young man who chose to step out as he was, with his talents and gifts given to him by God, defeated the giant. And that is where we stand today. We stand in a place where we are called to be who we are and fight the Goliaths in our lives. There are Goliaths in our lives. They may not be 10 feet tall, they might be 4 feet tall. They might be 6'10", but they're actually 5'10". We look around our lives and in our homes, in our places of work, even in our churches sometimes. Oh, it's hard to say. I didn't actually write that down because I didn't want to. I took that out, but in our churches, sometimes there's Goliaths. But our job now, as Davids, as people who are going to be honest with ourselves about who we are and what we are called to do, is to fight the battle in front of us. So who are those Goliaths? How do you know a Goliath in the world? I'd give you time to think about, but I'm sure they come to mind right away. The Goliaths in our world try to make themselves look good while making others look bad. The Goliaths look for the person with the ill-fitting armor to go out and fight against in battle and in life and at work. The Goliaths look out for themselves and not one another. However, church, I believe that we can be giant slayers. That as people who are loved by God and called by God, we have the strength, we have the power, and we have the ability and knowledge to be who we are, just as God has made us and called us to slay the Goliaths. But those Goliaths can be taken down when truth is spoken in places where lies are making their home. The Goliaths can fall when genuine, honest people stand up for what is right. The Goliaths can be defeated when people choose to genuinely live out love for one another, for creation, and for themselves. The Goliaths are out there. They're causing havoc. They are taking our farms and turning them into parking lots. They are taking people and putting them away. Those are the Goliaths of our world that we are in battle with. So it's our choice. Are we going to put on the armor that fits us, that was prepared for us, and that will save us? Will we go out and fight the Goliath? Or will we hang back, like many did, as the call went out, saying, oh no, it's too big of a job. That person's too big of a presence. I can't do it. Or will we be like David, who authentically stood up to the Goliath in his life? So I challenge us to put down the armor that does not fit and choose to live into being the people that God has called us to be for the betterment of ourselves, our neighbors, and our family. And I would go as far to say as it's a fight that we fight for our country. So my hope today is that each of us will take time to look at our lives, to sit down and say, who am I? Am I wearing the clothes that are right for me? Do I have the right tools in my hands? And where's the Goliath? Where's the Goliath that I am called to fight? What do I need to fight the Goliath? And I would say, thankfully, we have a room of people who will join in the battle to fight the Goliath who sometimes seems so loud and so strong and wreaking so much havoc. But we, church, being who we are called to be by God, can fight the Goliath together. Amen. It doesn't matter how big that Goliath in your life is. It doesn't matter that you feel small compared to that Goliath in our lives. Go with your true and authentic self. Go with the love of God. Lead with the love of God and be the love of God to bring the giants, the bully Goliaths in our lives and in our country down where they belong. Go with God's love as you go out to defeat the giants. Amen.